Hello, this is Tuesday night, February 28th, last day of February. And we're going to introduce Matt Stevenson. He's a former AP teacher in Florida, AP reader, scorer, all that stuff. So he was great to want to do this session, which is called Evolution of Primary Source Use in AP Courses. And now he is at the University of Tennessee, and I will give it up to him.
Hey, thank you, Dr. Kenna. I will go ahead and share my screen. It's been disabled, so if you could please allow me to share the screen. There we go. Okay. All right. Okay, can everybody see my screen okay?
I can see it, yes.
Excellent. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on. Let me stop the share for just one moment. This is something I did the last time. I want to make sure I share the sound. That was something that was an issue last time. I didn't share the sound and all my video clips didn't work. So let's try that again. Okay, so good evening, everybody, and welcome. Sorry, too far there. Welcome to my presentation. This is Primary Sources in AP Courses, a look at APUSH, APEURO, Capstone, and the new African-American Studies, or AFAM. I'm your presenter, Matt Stevenson, out of the University of Tennessee at Knoxville in the Theory and Practice Teacher Education Department. So the purpose of tonight's presentation is I want to address some recent developments in advanced placement curriculum with an eye toward what is to come. The intended audience here is current and future social studies teachers, AP and otherwise, right? It's not just those who teach AP, but those who might have an interest in this, or of course, have invested interest in what College Board has to offer. I'm also looking to talk to mentor teachers, making sure that we are reaching out to interns and to any new teachers that might need to kind of get a grasp on what exactly AP has to offer, what College Board means. I'm looking to talk to classroom stakeholders of all kinds. So that means administrators, parents, students, and of course, a shout out to College Board if they are listening, which we'll see. The agenda for tonight, I'll give a few comments on the state of advanced placement social studies as it is. We'll give a broad overview of what has changed and what has stayed the same, again, using these four courses as sort of our model here. We'll look to the future with AP Capstone and African-American Studies, with a look to what is happening, both a shift in content and a shift in structure, and then sort of expound a bit on what is possible and ideally what needs to be done. The online version of this presentation is available via this QR code. So if anybody is interested, and I'll have this posted at the end as well. I have other videos that are posted there that comment on a lot of this kind of stuff as well. So that QR code, again, is available here, and you can use it, or you can access it again at the end of this presentation. Okay, so let's take a look at the typical AP Social Studies course. Again, if you've taught AP courses, you're probably familiar with this. But if you're not, again, this just kind of gives you a rough breakdown of where things stand at this point. The typical AP Social Studies courses are the AP United States History, or APUSH, European History, and World History. These courses are, again, full class years in content. That is then all measured on one end of course exam. That end of course exam is structured as you see here. Students will have to take a multiple choice section, which is 55 questions done in 55 minutes. They will then have a short answer section, which is 40 minutes of writing on 3 separate prompts. There is a document-based question, or DBQ, with a suggested 1-hour writing time, and a long essay question, which is 40 minutes of writing. So do the math on that pretty quickly here. You recognize that this is 3 hours and 15 minutes, or what ends up being about 4 hours when you include the breaks, of exam time. That is brutal, to say the least. Just kind of a little anecdotal side note on that one. When I was teaching advanced placement courses, every year they would release, particularly for world history, release a practice exam, usually around around March or April. I always took that with the students. It's kind of like, we're all in the trenches together by this point. I know this content in and out. I can say that really with no false modesty there. I know the history content. I have scored for these exams for going on almost 20 years now. I know what they're looking for, and I find these exams absolutely exhausting. So again, and this is something that won't be surprising to most practitioners here, imagine being a 16, 17, or 18-year-old student having to engage with an exam that's this exhausting, that covers an entire year's worth of content, not to mention those students, of course, who are taking multiple AP exams. Think about those who actually get extended time. You're talking students who could be there for up to 8 hours of exam. Again, exhausting. And the question, of course, comes up is why? Why are we doing this? Why is this the way that we want to measure the college readiness and college content of these AP courses? Okay, so the rethinking of advanced placement exams has already taken place, already begun to take place. In particular, this is taking place with the introduction of a new series of courses called Capstone. Again, these courses have been around for a little less than a decade now. They were piloted in the 2014-2015 school year and rolled out to mainstream schools, in other words, any school that wants them, in 2016. This is actually the year that I started teaching it. It was the following years when I started teaching capstone research. The capstone program is sort of a rethinking about how we are going to measure students' aptitude when it comes to college level material. The capstone program is broken into 2 years. The first year is called Capstone Seminar. There is still an end of course exam, although not quite as extensive as what you see in social studies. But more significant, as I wanted to highlight here on the slide, is the task 1 and task 2 for the capstone seminar. Task 1 is a 1,200-word essay, and task 2 is a 2,000-word essay that incorporates a stimulus packet. More on what that stimulus packet is here in just a little bit, because again, we are talking sources today. These 2 tasks are not in the pressure cooker of taking an end of course exam. These 2 tasks are, in fact, they are something that are research projects throughout the school year. Usually task 1 is done in the first semester, task 2 in the second semester. But again, the flexibility is there both for the student as well as for the instructor on when these tasks are going to be done. And I do think that ultimately this is a better measure about how students are able to engage with materials and evidence. Now, again, there is still an end of course exam. It is 3 short answer questions with a suggested 30 minutes writing time and an evidence-based argument essay, suggested 90 minutes writing time. We're still talking more than 2 hours of an exam, but again, that kind of cuts in half what you see in the social studies courses, and therefore, again, a little bit more manageable, although, again, College Board isn't completely getting away from the end of course mentality. But what's even more fascinating, at least from my perspective, my personal take on this, is the second year of the capstone program. Again, this is the capstone research course. In the research course, which, again, I hate to put it this way, it's almost like seminar is a weed out for those who can then participate in the research course, but that tends to be the way it's treated. But what this does is it takes those students who have succeeded in seminar and unleashes them for a year-long research project. The product of which is supposed to be a 4,000 to 5,000 word essay of publishable quality. And just kind of give you an idea of what I mean by publishable quality, this is an example of one of my students, my former students, who actually ended up publishing her capstone paper. I did insist on this a bit, but this actually just came out this past December. It is a book chapter in the source, Enhancing Education Through Multidisciplinary Film Teaching Methodologies. This was a film study that she did. So Harper Self was the author here, that originated from her actual capstone project. She did rework it during her undergrad years and now has a publication, which again, I insisted on this one, so you're going to have to please forgive me for the shameless plug. But this, again, is a good demonstration and a good example of what is possible, right? What can be done when it comes to this sort of research project. Something that's not just the pressure cooker of taking an exam, but in fact, again, part of the actual research process. Now, turning back to the APUSH and the APEURO exams, part of the exam, of course, that we're going to really get into details here is dealing with sources and source material. These are some examples. Sorry, let me back up half a step here. I've started doing some research into the AP exams themselves. I'm looking into sort of a qualitative analysis through coding to determine the type of questions as well as the type of documents that are best represented here. And I will use it as a comparison once the African-American Studies course becomes available. The first exam is not until 2025. But this is sort of an example of what you see in the traditional social studies courses as far as sources are concerned on these document-based questions, right? This is where you're going to find the primary sources. So this coding here and looking at the types of exams themselves, or excuse me, type of prompts that are given on these exams. What I have here is a sample from APUSH, so the AP US exam, the past 5 years. The topics have covered US independence, late 19th century empire, the progressive era, the economy 1940 to 1970, and national identity in the early 19th century. APURO, the sampling that I'm giving you guys here is from the past 20 years. These are just, again, 5 samples here covering the English Civil War, 30 Years' War, religious toleration, 16th and 18th century, religious toleration in 16th and 18th century, the Peasants' Revolt in the 17th century, 16th century, and World War I Germany. So these are, again, pretty typical topics, all very important topics, certainly something that our students should be engaging with. But again, you kind of see what we're looking at here, very traditional political history, economic history. There's some cultural, really religious aspects, I think, that kind of come into play in here, mostly as it plays in sort of the political conversation. And again, these are the bedrocks of social studies. This is what we do to ensure that our students are able to engage with this material. So again, this is not a knock on APUSH or an APURO, but you can see how these topics, again, might be somewhat limiting as far as student engagement might be concerned. And of course, the kinds of students that will be drawn to this, not to put too fine a point on it. Now, compare this with the Capstone seminar themes. So I mentioned earlier that Capstone seminar includes a stimulus packet. This would be their answer to the document-based question. Their stimulus packet is going to be a series of documents that the students must engage with in their research process. It does give them a theme, and you can see the themes that are here in comparison with the APUSH and APEURO exams. The themes over the past 5 years are as follows: privacy and surveillance, sports, happiness, change, and perspectives. Look how broad these topics are compared to, again, the traditional social studies courses of 19th century empire or the 30 Years' War. Once again, this is not a knock on those other more traditional social studies courses, but imagine what students can do with such a broad topic, especially when they're engaging in a variety of different materials, or with a variety of different materials. So what's in the screen bottom right here is an example of one of the stimulus packets. This is just going to be a list of the sources themselves. And we kind of label these. You can see they come from a variety of different directions. Now, we're talking social studies. We can see in here anthropology, we can see economics, we can see history, cultural studies. All those, again, would fall very much into our social studies theme. But we also get to have students engage with arts-based material, with literature, with science-based sources. All of this combined together with these relatively broad themes and ideas, all for a research purpose that the student has created themselves. I do think this is much more impactful and much more of a measure of what students are capable of than the pressure cooker of the end of course exam we see in APUSH and APEURO. Imagine if we were to turn our more traditional social studies courses in this direction, right? Giving students maybe a document-based question that allows them to then research their topics, as opposed to, again, trying to slam this all together in a 3-hour and 15-minute period. So here's one example of the sources.
It was 1869, we gathered in the city of Tartu for our first song festival, and ever since the song festival has been a beautiful way to express, please, dear Lord, help us to keep our country and our language.
Song celebration tradition is something what is in our history, and I think it is like in people's genealogy. And when we had singing revolution Estonians, they just gathered to song celebration ground and sang. It was that declaration. And I remember the feeling that we have 80,000 people here. You can't arrest and you can't kill all of them. And I think that it made Estonian people feel that music can make difference. And that's why we continue with this tradition.
Pause here for just a moment and really just kind of think about how cool that was, right? Regardless of your opinion on the singing revolution and so forth, think of what Seminar has done with their research model. They've allowed us to engage with sources in a very different way, right? On the APUSH exam or the APEURO DBQ, the sources you're getting are going to be, again, as we would call kind of traditional sources. They're going to be written sources, so maybe a government document, maybe a correspondence between two important officials or something along those lines. You'll get charts and graphs, right, that might be showing, say, shifting populations or food production, something along those lines. And you might even get some images. You might get some, like, say, famous paintings, or you might get some photographs. All of those, again, very important and very key sources. I want to continue to emphasize, I am not trying to knock the APUSH and APEURO materials. But what Capstone has done by releasing its students from this sitting down in this enclosed environment in the pressure cooker of an end of course exam, to some degree anyway, has allowed students to engage with film, to engage with music, to engage with arts-based documents that are living symbols of their interpretations of the world around them. So this Song of Freedom at the Estonian Song and Dance Festival is just one example from the 2022 school year. Again, I was still teaching at the time. My students were incredibly excited to see this kind of engaging source, as was I, again, when I looked at this. And it got me thinking, I'm like, imagine if you could use a source like this on the AP European history exam. How cool would that be? I don't know how you would do it on the actual exam itself, but think about this. Think about the topics that this particular video could cover. And this is just some examples here, right? You could easily use this video for discussions of nationalism, for discussions of the Soviet bloc. Again, obviously you have the man at the very beginning who's talking about the freedom of Estonia. This is going to be a country that is under the control of the Soviet bloc. Of course, it's a broader discussion of the Cold War. It's all about the impact of culture and resistance movements. There's so much possibility here that Capstone is embracing. How interesting would it be if some of the more traditional courses would embrace that as well in the social studies? So here's another example from this year, another video that once again kind of engages in a very different way its students when it comes to interpreting the source material and the world around us.
When you imagine the architectural wonders of the world, what do you see? The greatness of the pyramids of Giza, or maybe the amazing aqueducts of ancient Rome? Both of these are amazing feats of human innovation. As an architect, I've often wondered, why do we monumentalize the ancient wonders of civilizations that collapsed such a long time ago? I've traveled the world studying ancient innovation. And what I've found are indigenous technologies from living cultures that are still in use. And some of these cultures you may have never heard of. They live in the most remote places on Earth, facing environmental extremes like desert drought and frequent flooding for generations. A couple of years ago, I traveled to northern India to a place overlooking the plains of Bangladesh where the Khasi people live in a forest that receives more rainfall than anywhere else on Earth. And during the monsoon season, travel between villages is cut off by these floods, which transform this entire landscape from a forested canopy into isolated islands. This hill tribe has evolved living root bridges that are created by guiding and growing tree roots that you can barely wrap your arms around through a carefully.
Look what Seminar is having students engage with, right? In this case, a TED Talk, but one that's, again, just, it starts to really inspire thoughts. What if this was on an AP World exam? or a US exam for that matter. But you put this on an AP World exam, some of the themes that come to mind, themes like globalization, study of ancient civilizations, regionalism, the proliferation of technology, right? These are all themes that are in the actual course guide for AP World History, right? Just the previous one would have a number of those materials in the AP European History course guide. This is the kind of thing that, again, Capstone and these research programs are allowing College Board students in order to engage with these kind of materials. Something that, again, it's helping us to rethink the model of how we're going to assess these students as being college ready. These are just some examples, of course. So it does bring up the question, which is, will the African-American Studies course be more like APUSH, or will it be more like Capstone? We don't have an answer 100% to that yet. There certainly has been some discussion about this. There's ways that it's running now and ways that it's supposed to run in the future, but College Board has demonstrated pretty consistently that it is flexible on this based on the responses. So again, this question, will African-American Studies be more like APUSH or more like Capstone? So here's just a brief list. And again, this is not everything. This is not everything that we can come up with. It's just some of the thoughts that I've come up with to sort of look at this new African-American Studies course and what we can hope for, as well as what we need to be mindful for when it comes to introducing this new course. And I want to make sure to kind of preface this a little bit. What we can hope for is not like these are the only good things that can happen, and that if they do happen, it's going to solve all our problems. It certainly is not the case. And when I say be mindful of, I don't mean them as warnings. I'm not trying to say like these are the things that are going to happen, or and in no way am I suggesting that we should limit African American studies. That is the opposite of what I'm going for here. But there's absolutely things that we need to make sure that we are aware of as we go into engaging with this new AP course. All right, so things we can be hopeful for. Certainly the advertisements from College Board around the African American Studies course is that this will help to give greater representation to marginalized voices. Certainly, if we're talking African American Studies, we're looking to help marginalized voices in the classroom itself, right? With the documents in which we can engage, with the individuals that we will study, with the literature in which we can read, right? All that's going to have a more broader representation in the classroom itself. But also in curriculum design, right? The people who are being brought in to design this curriculum, right? These are people who might have very well been left out of the APUSH or APURO or AP World Curriculum Design. And of course, a big issue, and this is something that kind of touches with me directly, is better representation of marginalized voices in scoring. Now, I score, as the College Board shirt here will indicate, for the AP European History exam. Yes, it's European history. It's not going to have the same representation as, say, U.S. history is going to, but there is no question that representation is a major issue, right? It being European history, I'll let your stereotypes run wild of what kind of population is doing most of the scoring. You're looking at one of them, just to kind of give an example. Other things we can hope for with the AFAM exam or the course itself is the opportunities for wider social and economic discussion. It seems kind of obvious to social studies practitioners and trainers like as we are that you cannot separate society and economic issues from race in this country. So by having a course that is designated to one specific racial group, this is going to open up a wider social and economic discussion. This is something that should not be shied away from, and it's something that's definitely in this first draft of the course curriculum for the AFAM course. I am curious with this introduction of a new course, is this going to pave the way for future AP courses that continue to engage with college level curriculum? What do you think about an advanced placement gender studies course? Where is that? What about a AP East Asian studies course? Or how about an AP African course, right? This is the big one that I found, like, okay, we have AP African American Studies, which yes, totally, very important. But how about AP Africa? We have Europe. So what's going on here? These are the kind of things that I would hope this course could somewhat pave the way. And of course, this will give us a chance to kind of break from the norms of the social study exams. That's the point I'm going to hit on here in just a moment. When we do, and we've already hit on it quite a bit up to this point, which is this course going to look more like APUSH or AP Capstone? I'm sure you can tell which one I much prefer. Now, that said, what should we be mindful for as we move forward with the AFAM curriculum and the introduction of this course to the mainstream audience? First of all, we have to be very, very careful that this does not become a segregated course. I know we're social studies teachers. We're people who see these things coming a mile away because we study history. We're like, okay, any of these kind of things could easily end up with, oh, well, all of the African-American students will take African-American studies. That will give them college credit, and there they go. And then everybody else will take APUSH. We would see that coming, and we would hopefully move against that. But I will give you a very short anecdote here. When the George Floyd protests were taking place in the summer of 2020. The next school year, there was some discussions among College Board for creating more of an African-American focal points for the capstone courses. And my administrator called me in and asked my opinion, because I was teaching the capstone course at the time. She asked my thoughts, like, oh, can we have a course that's more focused on the African diaspora and so forth, which again, all good stuff. And by the way, my capstone course was already doing that. But when she asked it this way, I looked right at her and I said, do you mean you want to create a segregated course? And she had very good intentions. There was no question that that was not what she was going for, but it was also very, very clear that she hadn't even thought of that. A lot of administrators who don't have a social studies background may not have thought of that. And again, this is not a knock on those administrators. It's not that they have bad intentions. They just might not recognize that by having these courses, they could very well split the student body. We have to have plans to prevent that from happening. Another issue with AFAM, of course, is, are the white voices still going to be dominant in an African-American studies curriculum? And what I mean by that is, there's been lots of studies done, I won't do the citations here, that do demonstrate that the vast majority of teachers in the United States to this day are still white women. Right, a very large, I've heard numbers as high as 83%. I don't know if that number is quite as modern today, but white women teaching an African-American studies course. Now, that said, even white men for that matter, because once again, I would fall into that category. Let me be very clear. I am not saying that white teachers cannot teach this course or even should not. I am not falling into a purity fallacy here. The idea that, again, only people, once again, the segregated mentality, only people who represent the group being taught should teach this. That is absolutely not what I'm going for. But we do need to make sure we are training those white teachers in order to engage with African-American studies curriculum that is not in a pedantic way, that is not in a, and this is the kind of terminology I use, sympathetic way. Sympathy can be very dangerous. It sounds like a good thing, but it's very different than, say, empathy, understanding somebody's struggle versus pitying somebody's struggle. We got to be very, very mindful of that, very careful as we move forward, particularly if we're training new interns and new teachers. And then, of course, this kind of blends the last two sort of mindful elements together. Is the AFAM course going to become sort of a, quote, alternate history to APUSH? Once again, this could result in segregation. It could result in changing narratives, that kind of stuff. But are we going to present it as like, well, you would take APUS or you would take AFAM, or the courses, if you're taking both of them at the same time, are coming up with different stories, right? That's going to be the issue. We need to ensure that these courses are supplementary toward each other. They are supporting each other. That is going to be a very important professional learning community to make sure that our APUSH instructors and our AFAM instructors are working together, not creating distinct courses and distinct curriculum. But what I really like about AFAM is the opportunity, of course, to once again hit on or give greater voice to marginalized groups. So going back to the research project on the coding when it comes to the APUSH and APEURO exams I've been looking into, here's just some examples of the, quote, voices that are coming through on these exams. What I have here is just very simple charts of breakdown of documents. So in the APUSH example, these are the documents that are on the document-based question. There are 7 documents on each question. I'm looking for the past 5 years. So we have 35 total documents in this case, and the identified race of the author. So you have 35 total documents, of which 31 of them come from authors who are identified as white. 3 of them come from authors who are identified as Black, and 1 comes from an author who's identified as Native American, which, once again, I consistently say I'm not trying to knock APUSH. This lack of representation is painfully to be expected given the history of the United States, particularly if you consider the topics that we talked about earlier, right? If we're talking about the independence of the United States, well, a very large portion of America's Black population at that era is not going to be able to read or write. Now, to be fair, a large portion of the poor white community is not going to be able to read or write either. So there's more lack of representation than just to be one racial group. But that does show there is going to be an issue of representation on these exams. The European history example here, this is a sample again from the past 20 years or 19 years in this case. We did a coding with, again, just 5 exams. I'm sorry, excuse me, 6 exams in this case. We did look at 45 documents. Oh, this, by the way, the reason for the difference in numbers is there was a period where actually 12 documents were utilized on the AP exam. So that's why the numbers are a little different than what you see in APUSH, because I did a different time span here. I know that can be a little confusing, but again, this isn't all the research, it's just a sample here. But in 45 documents, we looked into that in terms of class and power status. It's kind of an obvious coding when it comes to like, okay, where's representation and voices? Of the 45 documents, 23 of them came from government directly. So depending on the time period, it could be a monarch, it could be a member of parliament, a prime minister, something along those lines. It could be a cabinet member, a chancellor, any of these kind of officials here who might be involved directly in government. 13 of the sources we looked at came from reformers. So it's usually people who are trying to write against the government, which APURO loves to hit on those. And not all of them are in newspapers. Some of them are pamphlets, but it's usually either reformers, sometimes even radicals, commenting on their stance against the government. And then there was 9 sources that represented nobility and the church. So again, we're talking a very literate representation, which again makes a lot of sense given that these are document-based questions and the type of questions we're going to see on these exams. But once again, it kind of opens up the thought, well, how do we get greater representation? Again, spoiler alert, nod toward the Capstone model, which again, kind of makes AFAM look long overdue, right? It kind of makes this alternative, well, let me try that again, because I made very clear earlier not to call it an alternative, this different perspective and marginalized voices that are going to be supplementary to what we're seeing here in APUSH and APEURO. Okay, so here's some examples. This is what AFAM is doing that APUSH is not doing. And again, I preface this by saying this is based on the pilot program that is currently going on. The 2022-2023 school year, College Board used this AFAM course as a pilot program in 60 schools that have not been disclosed around the country. Next year, they will continue with the pilot program, but they're going to open it up to hundreds of more schools. And then finally, the 2024-2025 year, they will open this up for the entire country to be as proliferated as APUSH is. But here's just some examples. So here are some of the historical events for characters: Malcolm X, Amistad. 42 is about the Jackie Robinson story. And then, of course, Selma is about the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, particularly the leadership of Martin Luther King Jr. It is notable that in the APUSH course guide standards, there is no mention of Malcolm X, there is no mention of the Amistad incident, and there is no mention of Jackie Robinson. There is one mention of Martin Luther King Jr. All of these, so Malcolm X, Jackie Robinson, and Martin Luther King Jr. Can be assumed to be part of the APUSH standard 8.10, which is all about the civil rights. Obviously, Amistad is about American slavery, so it's going to be a much earlier standard. But again, no specific mentions. The AFAM standards that have been published here in this pilot program mention Malcolm X 18 times. We see the difference already, a huge shift in the voices that are being represented. Right? The Amistad incident is mentioned 3 times in those standards. Still no mentions of Jackie Robinson, which to me, once again, it's not necessarily a bad thing. I don't think Jackie Robinson is misrepresented often in history in that case, or there's a limitation on his representation. However, it is kind of interesting in the case, like how much they're going to represent issues like sports and music, particularly when we're not talking like, say, modern day. Something definitely to consider for the future. And Martin Luther King Jr. is mentioned 17 times. So this is kind of a big shift here. And actually, of particular note, Malcolm X is actually mentioned 1 more time than Martin Luther King Jr. I am convinced that that is intentional, right? That they did that. They're like, okay, we want to make sure we're getting away. You can't, I mean, obviously you can't ignore Martin Luther King Jr., but nor should you. But the Malcolm X gets 1 more mention. That's not an accident. But also what I find interesting with the AFAM curriculum is, once again, the shifting of the concept of sources. So what I have here, and I did this intentionally, is to show you the films representing either these individuals and their story or the events in the case of Amistad. These films themselves are interesting sources. They would be, of course, secondary sources. Practitioners like yourselves, once again, would recognize them as secondary sources pretty quickly. Amistad, the actor Jimon Unso, is portraying Cinque. He is not Cinque himself, and therefore a secondary representation. But what about turning these films into primary sources? Would AFAM allow that kind of manipulation of sources? And again, I usually ask this question of my students: how would we turn these into primary sources? And would this be something that can be done in the African-American Studies course? Well, of course, to turn them into primary sources, you have to look at the time in which they are actually produced, right? The study of Malcolm X would not simply be the study of Malcolm X as the individual, but also his representation in the 1992 film. If AFAM is going to follow the Capstone model, you're starting to see the connections, I think. We're starting to see, again, how powerful this source interaction can really be and how diverse the interpretations can be. I see my time's getting a little short here. I want to make sure to leave plenty of time to discuss at the end. So I'm not going to go through all of this, but an example I pulled out here, for instance, is the film Malcolm X from 1992. This is, and again, I know this is being recorded, so I'm not going to actually read through all of these. You guys can go back to the video and see some reasons here why you would use this film, some things you need to watch out for in this film, particularly because it's a 1990s portrayal. We need to make sure that we understand these are, in fact, historical fiction. They are not exactly, they're not specifically historical representations themselves. But if we took this film and we took a clip from this film and used the Capstone model, how cool would that be for a research project? So with that in mind, I do have another short little clip here for you guys.
All right, that's enough. I want these people moved out of here.
Fruit of Islam are disciplined men. They haven't broken any laws. Yeah.
What about them?
That's your headache, Captain. But if Brother Johnson dies, I pity you. Doctor?
He'll live. He's getting the best care we can give.
Thank you, Doctor.
Surgeon.
All right, okay. Now let's disperse this mob. That's too much power for one man to have.
What you could do with that scene in a research context. Not only is this a depiction of an event that took place in 1957, this is a representation of that event in 1992, and we have the benefit of hindsight of 2023. Our students being able to analyze this interaction between the police, a portrayal, a Denzel Washington version of Malcolm X, and the crowd chanting, "We want justice." There's so much research possibility that could be utilized if we open up this course to the Capstone model. And it looks like that's what's going to happen. At least it's happening in the actual pilot program. Right now, there is no actual AP exam for AFAM. The pilot program is based on a research project. The research project that, again, allows students to engage with whatever sources and materials they want in order to present their findings. And to kind of continue with this theme on film, and I'll wrap up here very quickly, because I want to make sure to get some comments, is if we consider what this course curriculum has done with particular standard number 4.19, which you can see here, bottom screen left, standard 4.19 is the study of Black studies, interesting of itself, Black futures and Afrofuturisms. So this last video here is a good example of the concept of Afrofuturisms.
As the Black Panther excitement spreads, Afrofuturism is an increasingly hot topic, but it's not new. In fact, it's been around for decades. First named in 1994 by cultural critic Mark Derry, Afrofuturism is a vibrant cultural movement exploring Afrocentric themes through the lens of sci-fi, fantasy, and steampunk. And it's been around for well over a century. But Afrofuturism isn't just sci-fi with Black characters. It's a thematic, future-forward exploration of the experience of being Black, and it crosses platforms, art forms, and disciplines. Edward Johnson's 1904 novel, Light Ahead for the Negro, is about an African-American man who travels into the future and discovers a socialist, egalitarian, post-racist America. The book is widely considered to be one of the earliest literary Afrofuturist works. Profound technological advances in mid-century America, we're talking everything from atom bombs to television sets, gave rise to expanded Afrofuturistic exploration in music, art, and on screen. Musicians like Sun Ra and Lee Scratch Perry were among the earliest Afrofuturistic influences.
Again, this is an actual source. You can see here on the 4.19, this is a source that they recommend for use in the classroom. Think of the possibilities. But also, again, think of the dangers. Think of the limitations here. States such as Florida have kind of paved the way for an attack on the African American Studies course, as it has been released now by College Board. That recently, just in this past week, seems to be followed up by the state of Virginia. It does bring up again, where exactly does Tennessee fall into this? So once again, given that this is recorded, I'm not going to go through all these. You guys can come back in your own time and take a look at the various complaints that the governor in Florida and the government in Florida has levied against this. And again, you can see the citation for the NPR article for this. Which leads us with their final questions and implications. What exactly would happen when AFAM introduces its end-of-course exam in 2025? Will this course end up looking more like APUSH and APEURO? Will College Board, as they've proven to do time and time again, submit to the intimidation of the states like Florida, possibly Virginia, possibly Tennessee? And what can we do to reverse this cooling effect? Well, what we can do is, because College Board has demonstrated that it will fold to pressure of the states, it will also fold to pressure from teachers, from parents, from invested students. I'd highly encourage us to push College Board to ensure that the AFAM continues to follow the Capstone model, and really to even ask the what if. What if we allow APUSH and APEURO to do the same thing? Okay, so once again, there's my QR code if you would like to see this presentation online. I have other presentations up there as well, and I'll go ahead and pause there. So thank you for your time.
All right. Thank you, Matt. Where are we at time? Where's the specific time? All right. Well, do we have any questions? There's a lot of information in there, especially if you aren't familiar with AP, such as myself. But a lot of interesting things there.
Hey Matt, this is Dylan. Thanks for the presentation. A lot of great stuff there. Having taught AP US and AP World before, could really follow along and gave me a lot to think about. So this year I'm teaching AP Gov for the first time. I wonder if you have any insights on that, because the structure of the course, the exam itself is a little bit different than the history forward courses. So in your experience with people you know or your research, do you have any insights on that and what that might look like? Well, I guess we know what it might look like in Tennessee, given, state laws and Knox County policies, other county policies, but just any insights you would have to offer.
Yeah, okay. So the two courses that I definitely, well, actually, yes, three courses technically, that were left off of this particular discussion is AP Human Geography, Governments, and Econ. And there's a very selfish reason I haven't taught any of those three. However, my experience with that, again, especially with government and econ, is frustration from colleagues, in particular because they're semester-long courses. I get it that, and again, obviously your knowledge on this is probably better than mine, given that you actually teach this course. Having to cram that stuff into a semester, particularly, and it depended on, in the school I used to teach at Florida, there was one government teacher and one econ teacher, and they would just rotate their students each semester, which meant that half of each group only got like maybe 2 months of instruction before they hit like exam season. And so there was so many issues and so forth with the course itself because of its limitations. Now, what I would say then, it's not really a solution, but it's one of the solutions, is exactly what I've prescribed here. What if we push College Board to more of a research-based model? How interesting would that be to, say, cram government and econ into one semester and then allow a second semester for more of a research model for both of those, perhaps, to more of a research model, like maybe a project for government, a project for econ that would then be supplementing for the end of course exam. Again, like I said, it's not a perfect solution, but that's where my mind immediately goes. It's like, what are we doing, especially again, because government, let's say you took it in the first semester, now you have a 5-month break before you take the exam. And then if you have, government in the second semester, you get, limited instruction. So yeah, again, your experience with that, I think would be invaluable for understanding. But if we look at it in that way, why are we trying to abuse our kids with these end of course exams? I think that kind of helps to guide us in the right direction. Okay. Any other questions or thoughts? I'm particularly interested actually in what Dylan had said about Tennessee laws. If anybody has any thoughts on that too.
This is Karen. I have a question, but it's not related to what you just said. Should I wait?
No, by all means, please.
Okay. I'm curious to know what you are understanding about women's studies. Do you have any idea about that?
I know it's not in the works. That's what I know. The one thing I do, again, I guess I've been scoring for APURO for quite some time, which once you get to a certain level, I'm a question leader, which is pretty high up in the leadership. We tend to kind of interact with a lot of the other fields and so forth. So I have friends in high places, I guess the best way I can put that. Nobody at the College Board level is seriously considering gender studies, which I think is an absolute, you can probably measure my opinion by my facial expressions on that one.
Well, I know a lot of universities are incorporating those into their college level studies, so it would make sense for us to start it earlier.
Oh, it would make total sense. I think it'd be a spectacular introduction into the AP curriculum. But again, we have to understand College Board is a corporation first and foremost.
Yeah.
Right. At least you can say with like major universities, it's like, yeah, obviously they're corporations too. But they get traditions and education values and these kind of things, accreditation. College Board is nothing but a corporation. So they are susceptible to corporate pressures. Right now, the pressure that's winning is the states. And I'll be very direct with this one. And again, I'm sorry I had to blow through the image there with the complaints of of Governor DeSantis in Florida. But one of the complaints was that the African-American studies focused too much both on queer theory and focused too much on Black feminism. And I find it interesting that he qualified Black feminism as opposed to just feminism, but nevertheless. But there is a move right now in Florida, and this is where, again, Tennessee, I kind of look around and see what's happening here, because Florida is like the canary in the coal mine. There's a move in Florida right now to ban gender studies from higher institutions as a major. That's the opposite direction, I would think.
Yeah, I know at the university we're not supposed to talk about divisive topics. I believe that's the phrase they use, something like that. Particularly in like training, not in education though. It's like employee training though, not education. Sorry,
This
Karen,
is
go ahead.
Karen again. I teach 4th grade. And I find in class discussions that gender topics are on the minds of 4th graders. So I think we really need to keep that in the forefront. Gender inequity and gender opportunity is still, even at a young age, an issue for a lot of them.
Oh, totally. This is what again, from my experience teaching Capstone, particularly the research course, although seminars certainly a lot of opportunities there, it lets the students really go with what they want. They can do anything as far as their research is concerned, as long as it's actual research, right? They'll end up identifying their field. I couldn't give a number to this. I really should have kept better notes when I was teaching at the time, but so many of the research projects dealt with gender issues, right? It could be identity issues. It could be there's one quick example. I had a student who interviewed the coach for the first girls wrestling team. We had a wrestling team that was introduced there. So she talked to her, interviewed the coach, and the coach had relayed like basically a 10-year battle to get a girls wrestling team. What a cool project that was to really show the inner workings about the system and so forth. So yeah, I mean, the Capstone model opens up those opportunities, but how cool would that be for a Capstone model and a gender studies course? I mean, again, the possibilities are just all over the place. Yeah, Florida, I'm seeing in the chats here. Florida, I think, is more aggressive and more angry in that case. And I think a big reason for this, and this is just my personal thought, right? Very divisive issue right here. But my personal thought is Florida is very purple. It's extremely purple. And what's happened is because there's a very heavy kind of blue shift in politics, the gerrymandering and the very loud politics are necessary. Tennessee, I don't think quite has the necessity for that kind of loud voice to really dominate politics because it is a very heavily red state. But it doesn't make it a better situation. Just it might explain why Florida is louder than everybody else.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right. Well, Matt, I think we're right at 6:51. So thank you so much for this. I'm going to hit the end button.